and welcome to the next video as part of the Origins of Dark and Demon Souls series. I am Random Gamer Riven, I should say, on behalf of Randomised Gaming. So this is a look at the second PS2 title FromSoft did in the series, and it's actually the fourth Kingsfield games as well. Kingsfield 4. It's subtitled The Ancient City in a few versions, but not all of them. So I'm just going to run the intro now, and once we get into game I'll begin the discussion. I should just say while I'm just checking this, just switch off vibration, that's off. And bizarrely change the backgrounds there as well. Yeah, I'll do that. This is recorded. I'm doing this commentary a live record, so you may hear the clicks of my PS2 pad. That's because I'm recording this directly as I'm playing it, and there's not much I can do to unfortunately undo my rather clicky PS2 pad, sadly.
The cursed land lies deep in a dense, colorless forest. Hidden within this land is an ancient city, once known to the forest folk as the Holy Land. Buried in the depths of the city, a warning was discovered long after the rulers have fallen. Grave misfortune will befall those who behold the idol that stares into the darkness. The idol, taken from the ancient land, led the kingdom down a path of destruction. The idol must be returned. Under a dark and cloudy sky, the Swordmaster led his men to the ancient land. The cursed land swallowed the soldiers, and all that remained was dark silence.
Back in the world of Kingsfield, and in many ways this is actually a step back from Eternal Ring, but I'll come to that in a second. Interestingly, for those who were paying attention to the intro, the actual castle shown in that intro looks very much like the continent of Boletaria, and the enemy knights that you see, their armour is slightly similar to the assassin character. I can't quite remember his name at the minute, the one who would assassinate the maiden in Firelink's shrine. And I wonder if it's connected, because they did do a lot of cheeky, there are some cheeky references in Kingsfield 4 to Demon Souls, well basically Demon Souls to Kingsfield 4. It makes it look like possibly that this is Boletaria we are entering. But yes, as you see, our mission is to get rid of this accursed statue, which I actually have in my inventory, the dark statue. There's a rather obvious and amusing little bug. You can actually sell the dark statue if you want to get rid of it straight away. Unfortunately, that probably means you won't be completing your quest if you do so. So, as with the other Kingsfields, there's an equipment system. I did find the equipment system a little bit higgledy-piggledy this time around, and overall, in many aspects, this is gameplay-wise a step back, as said, from Eternal Rings. So one of the big changes is now analog stick is supported, although annoyingly the actual look springs. Up and down is used on the right stick only, and on the right stick they've actually inverted it, so up is down and down is up. Now that's great for flight games, not so good when you're supposed to be looking around. The other fact is this is the PAL version, so unfortunately this is 50 Hz again. This is not fully optimized. There's some optimizations you can see because the borders are not top to bottom, but it's very, very slow and chundry, even compared to the PAL version of Eternal Ring. And for many ways, this was released in 2002, and I can see why Kingsfield went on a bit of hiatus after Kingsfield 4. This is by far from the best outing in the series. In fact, Eternal Rings, from what I've played, is a better game overall. This is really slow. One big change in this one, aside from sort of the music, etc., is that you can now kill NPCs in game, which of course is moving towards the Dark Soul environment. Although at this point, from what I saw when I attacked one of the NPCs, he did not resist me attacking him, and upon killing him I did not gain any items. And also voice acting is also missing as well. So there's no voice acting in this one either, unlike as you saw in Eternal Rings if you go back and watch the Eternal Rings video. So in many ways this feels like a step back, despite the fact it was released afterwards. Assuming he says, "Let me give you this," he's referring to his club. So I've been sent underground into the ruins. Beware of the creatures, they're everywhere. And he's actually referring to the plant creatures from Kingsfield 2, which are back. Now, another thing is you have to look at items to pick them up, which is incredibly irritating. At least in Eternal Rings, you could sort of walk near them and press X. In this one, you have to be directly on them. Equipmenting is also a little bit higgledy-piggledy. And yes, I keep hitting start there because I think the start menu is always much better to bring up the inventory. You don't need a pause if the inventory pauses the game. Now, unlike Eternal Rings, the stamina bar is back, so I do have to be very careful. You have to if you attack when your stamina bar is low, you will do no damage, or your attack will even deflect off the enemies. Now, first off, in this location is a ruined city, and I actually need to grab some armor. So you saw there's Ben Mason's shop. He's just around the corner, and I'll visit him once I've collected the armor pieces around here. The combat with the basic club is incredibly slow, even slower than Kingsfield 2. And as Kingsfield 2 was on the PS1, this is quite a real step back, I felt, in many ways. The save point in this game is this rather, well, it's supposed to be an angel statue. To me, it looks more like a Cthulhu statue. And I'm just saving the game quickly, just in the event of something I die horribly. Because as with Kingsfield 2, there are a few nasty areas, and the Demon Souls games, you can there's one bit where you're just walking along, and if you don't walk on the right part of the ground will just crack underneath you and you fall into lava. Now, lava does kill you, and hence why I've got to be extra careful at this bit, because I need to actually, in order to get one of the items, I have to walk across some rocks, and I need to dodge lava at the same time. So one of the good points, as you can see there, is there's actually lighting now on the monsters when they're near the lamps, etc. And as you can see at this point, combat is incredibly slow, even slower than Kingsfield 2. It's harder to even manoeuvre around the enemies. Kingsfield 2 was actually far faster. And this is clearly a reworking of the plant monster you saw in the Kingsfield 2 video. And again, stamina has to be at max in order for you to really do any damage. If you swing your club early, you will not do much damage at all. So it's giving me 8 gold. But as I said, the controls, overall this does feel very much a step back. I mean, it's very slow paced, which is a shame. But it really, when you were playing this, I could see why the series took a bit of a hiatus following Kingsfield 4, and why they went back and redid it all for Demon Souls. But as mentioned in the starting, that intro, there's definitely the design of the locations in the intros is very Dark Souls as well. So I do think that possibly this might actually be Boletaria. We have to bring this accursed statue to this land. But again, it's a cursed land. Nothing about your hero, the protagonist. You're just literally a nameless person sent to a land to try and save it. And yes, you can see as I'm wandering around there, I take falling damage. So need to actually be quite extra careful now, because there's another bit where I'm going to walk along and the land's going to fall apart. So you're going to see me in a second. I'm going to walk across the battlements to get, there's a steel helmet, or a leather helmet, and basically as you walk across the battlements they fall apart. So in fact I'm going to heal up, because as soon as they fall apart I take a load of damage. You can now shortcut items as well. Now as you see here, there's a leather helmet up ahead, and just before I get to it, crash bang wallop. And you see you take an absolute ton of damage there. So I'll just do that, and now that I've got my equipment I will equip it. So the equipment scene itself is not the best. You have to sort of press left and right to navigate this. It doesn't automatically bring up the items. It's kind of weird with how it flows. Usually you see the items available to you straight off the bat. This you have to actually press left or right on them on the empty slot. So I've got to be careful there. There's two plant monsters. There's also a herb in the corner here. But unlike Eternal Rings, this is definitely a lot slower, and it's a shame to see From Software kind of lose some of the momentum that they had with Eternal Rings, where you could see some of the improvements to the series, and yet they've gone back, and then they appear to have, but for Demon Souls they definitely took aboard some of the improvements they did in Eternal Ring and then added them back in. As you see here, moving around the enemies this time around is incredibly slow, even worse than King's Field 2. It's very hard to even flank the enemies this time. You can run, but the run, as you see, doesn't really increase your speed that much either. And the stamina bar is incredibly slow to recharge as well, which just does not help matters in the slightest. The other major problem with the combat now is there's a complete lack of variety with your swings, whereas in Dark and Demon Souls you have multiple moves with the R1 and R2 triggers. In this you just have the straightforward attack and that's it. It's very, very repetitive and dull. The other problem with the combat is that by the time we get to the PS2 era, having a single strike really isn't acceptable, especially when you look at games like Devil May Cry, which make this look pale in comparison. Now, there is actually an item up the top there, but I need something to knock it off. I don't believe the barrels hold items this time around, or at least I've not found any yet. Whenever I search them, it just says barrel and that's it. I think they can now be destroyed, but at the moment I've been unable to find any way to destroy them. But much like Demon and Dark Souls, the story, as I said before, you've got to return this idol, which is cursed. So effectively, it's a bit like the cursed ones or the dark ones in Dark Souls, and you have to restore it to the land. Now, bizarrely, despite the fact it looks like a treasure chest, it's a mission chest. So I assume it's related to the mercenaries that came here earlier, but you don't open it. But surely, if that was loaded with mercenary gear, if I was in there, I'd be like, "Yep, grab it, and let's go." So this way is Minor Cemetery. And there's another NPC, and he's going to tell me that the bridge is out. So once again, there's a few routes, but not as many as some of the Dark Souls games or Kingsfield 2 at this point. I think Kingsfield 4 overall, from what I've seen, is more structured, so it doesn't quite have the random, doesn't quite have the choice of the earlier games. So in many ways, this Kingsfield 4 does feel like quite a disappointment in compared to the previous games. It does feel a bit more formulaic, and at the same time, the controls, as I mentioned, are more sluggish. It's certainly playing this and Eternal Rings so close together, it feels like Eternal Rings is a better game. And Kingsfield 4 these days is not that easy to track down. It's quite expensive, and although it's the last in the Kingsfield series, you can see why based on what I played. So this is Ben Mason's shop. I'm just going to run down. He's got a chest in here that I can grab some gold, although at this point I can't afford to buy anything. I should point out that lava that I was walking around to grab the boots. If I fell into that lava, it was instant death. So can I look at his plates? No. There's a chest out back as well, but it's blocked by barrels, so I have to destroy them in order to access it. So a buyer, that's strange. So notice how it's just like, oh yeah, we've got a buyer. Admittedly, you can actually kill the shop owning NPCs, but that way I would not advise it, because of course you then can't buy anything, and they don't drop any equipment from what I've seen. So see there, everything is out of my price range at the minute. So I'm going to venture further in. So the minute I'm heading towards, I believe, a healing temple where I can also gain my first magic spell. Now they've removed the walking effect that you saw in Eternal Rings, thankfully. But as you can see, overall it's just so much slower than Eternal Rings. And the removal of I don't understand why they didn't include voice acting either. Having used voice acting so effectively in Eternal Rings, it seems really bizarre that they removed it. All in all, at the time this was released in around 2002, and looking at it, it feels like it was behind the curve when it was released, and it's easy to see why this was slated in review. So yeah, the location's a bit weird with the lava to the side there now. I've got to avoid that, otherwise I'll instant death. And this patch here, as I mentioned earlier, this is actually a trap patch. If I move left and right, you can see there's a slight gap. That sort of fiery crescent indicates that there's some texturing. What that is this is actually a trap. If I walk on that, the ground will crack underneath me and I will die instantly. So I don't want to do that. But there's the old Dark Souls, you died thing as well. There's plenty of nasty, unexpected surprises in Kingsfield as well. Now these guys are a pain. You have to hit them on their head. Oh, you can strike them on the chest as well. I've got to be really careful so as I don't step on that cracking bit behind me. Okay, level up. I think that's purely just a stat up as before. I'll just check my status. So yeah, hit, stab, slash, defense, magic. Yeah, level ups work the same as in Kingsfield. I must admit, Eternal Rings, the level ups are a bit more generous. So well, they're saying that I haven't killed a huge amount of enemies to get my first level up. Kingsfield 2 was very much you had to kill an arm and a leg before you, or an absolute ton of enemies before you got any upgrades. Okay, so I've just cleared out the forest area as there was quite a few worms. I didn't want to spend ages fighting it. So this is actually, I believe this is one of the shrines or something I've got to explore next. And there's actually a few caves I can explore as well. So we're beginning to see the game beginning to open up a bit. There's also a way down here as well. Now, actually I think that's the way I came. But again, annoyingly, the stamina is linked to the running, so if you run, you then can't attack at all. And as mentioned, if you just swing aimlessly when you don't have a bar charged up, you will do no damage whatsoever. See there, it just... In fact, I'm just going to quickly heal up. Sometimes you even get like a bounce sound effect. Just see if I can show you the bounce. Yeah, just like there, just sits there and does nothing. So more worms. Again, I must admit, there's not a huge variety in the enemies at this point in time. Okay, it's early on, but you kind of expect a mix of the enemies, not just the same one over and over again. But I think if you can see from this point, I don't think Kingsfield 4 is a huge improvement over Kingsfield 2 in many ways. It does feel, I said, a step back from Eternal Rings, which, while not directly a game, is still part of the series, and it just feels that this is one of those games that they didn't really try to move the series forward and suffered as a result. While Kingsfield 4 did get released in all territories, it's quite unlike Eternal Rings. Eternal Rings is relatively common here in Europe. Kingsfield 4 is not, and can be quite pricey to pick up these days. So unless you're a die-hard fan or you only have a PS2 to experience the series, this is probably not the best way to start the series. In fact, Kingsfield 2 on the PS1 in Europe is quite a bit cheaper to pick up from what I've seen. Although that said, you can still pick up a copy relatively cheap if you look around hard enough. It's not that common though at all. This is certainly not. In fact, neither Kingsfield games in Europe are that easy to come by. There was only two and 4 were both released. Although, as we mentioned earlier, 2 was released under the name of Kingsfield rather than Kingsfield 2, its correct name. Certainly I feel Kingsfield 4 seems to be much slower paced than Kingsfield 2. Oh, some armour. I mean, this graphically is much better than Kingsfield 2, which Kingsfield 2 looked incredibly poor, but this just feels... Aside from the graphics, it just feels they haven't really improved much. I do feel Eternal Rings is a better game, and it's disappointing when you see things like this. You felt FromSoft should have moved it far more forward than what they did do. But it's when you see games like this, it's easy to understand why From Software didn't get the success they should have had in the earlier era. Oh, a decent weapon. That's what I wanted. It's easy to see why, you know, the Dark Souls series took so long to really get established, because it wasn't until they started adding in the third-person view that the games really started getting noticed. In fact, Demon Souls as a whole is definitely a much better game than the early Kingsfield ones. I think the big change is of course the third person angle, because they looked at Monster Hunter, and Monster Hunter overall is much faster pace. This, as you can see within that arm swing, is just so slow, and this is one of the main problems with the Kingsfield games. They were just too slow. Dark Souls and Demon Souls, they add that arcade pace in, because that's the best way to describe it. They're much more paced like arcade games in many aspects, which is weird because technically Demon Souls and Dark Souls are totally different to what you'd expect from an arcade game, but pacing wise they have that sort of bam bam bam, in out, you're dead, you're alive kind of pacing that this doesn't. This is a very, very slow, arduous process that's really not best suited for this genre. I mean, pacing wise, games like Eye of the Beholder, although this is clearly modelled on that type of model, Eye of the Beholder and Dungeon Master, they are probably faster and betterly placed games. So I'm just going to head down this way. Is this the way we came originally? Yeah, this is the way we came. I'm just going to try the other route, and then I'll quickly head into the shrine. I think one of my other criticisms as with Eternal Rings was that some of the locations, these early PS2 games, as they started using the high-res text, some more high-res textures, they initially were quite bland. It's kind of an effect that they needed to save the memory, so they often made quite generic things like just this bland canyon. Admittedly, this is probably masking the loading between locations, but okay, we've got an NPC there. What's she going to tell us? Okay, so she's found a nice soul stone in that shack over there. Obviously, it's a reference to an item. I mean, all the games in the Kingsfield, I mean, Eternal Ring, even Eternal Ring's a bit more lively, but even the Kingsfield games, as with the Demon and Dark Souls, are all very bleak. And the story always seems to be, as I mentioned before, it's always a traveller, always you're there for a reason. So in this, we're here to restore an idol that has a bleak fate, or you're exploring some sort of, I mean, Eternal Ring, you're looking for the Ring of Power. In Kingsfield 2, you're at the island, the mysterious island. I mean, Demon Souls, you're in the Nexus, and of course Dark Souls, you're in Firelink, Shrine, Drang Lake, and both, of course, there's always been some sort of calamity, or it's always mysterious, and it's that theme, fantasy themes run through the whole franchise, and it's quite an interesting one, because it's one of the things From Software are very good at, and have been for a long time, is they do implied storytelling. So a lot of it's actually left up to the user. They always hint at things. They always give a decent enough narrative, but there's always a lot of mysteriousness, and it's left up to your mind to put things together. And because of that, people will put things together in different ways. Some person might see a link between two characters that another doesn't, etc. Now, that in many ways for this type of game I do feel is a very good. Indirect storytelling is very, very unique, because it enables a more freshening approach, and it's much more what we used to see in these sort of Amiga days with H2O healing string. Well, that doesn't look very healing today. These days, no water in it. But certainly saying the indirect story, there's much more implied nature. You don't know what's going on, you don't know, and you put it together. So I do like narrative stories as well, but sometimes these type of stories work really well when done well. I mean, implied stories have to be, you do need to give the right amount of time to them to imply the story correctly, though. Take, for example, From Software's earlier Armour Core games. They suffered appallingly bad translations where a lot of the text was not translated correctly, so the implied story was just complete gobbledygook and you had no idea what was going on because characters weren't telling you the right things. They'd mistranslated. Another one, that's an enemy, isn't it? Another one, ironically, is the BlazBlue series, because some of that's implied story, some of that is just really bad translations where they've not translated the characters' names correctly, and they often change what they're referring to, and they've not. Probably a bit of a blunt weapon fighting this thing, but and it's dead. But implied stories, when done well, are very good. But as I said, the early Armour Core games, because they hadn't been translated correctly, and because people obviously hadn't spent the time doing it, you had no idea what was going on. And that's to some extent with the early Kingsfield games as well. I think there is some element of the story is not that well translated. So again, we've got an NPC in an enemy area as well. Let's see what this guy says. So he also wants a soul stone. So we've got the village girl wants a soul stone to heal her mother, and the thief wants a soul stone. Are we going to get multiple soul stones, or is there just be the one, and do we have to make some sort of moral choice? Ooh, hidden door. Ouch, skeleton. Bad, bad. Let's hope this guy isn't as strong as the one in the earlier game, because otherwise he's going to take me down in like one hit. Okay, he is quite tough. So I'm going to make a beeline out of here. Ooh. Right, I might try and brave it, use another healing item, or I might try and find... There's definitely magic around here, so maybe I'll try and look for that instead. But as you see, hidden walls, just like in Dark Souls as well. I had a feeling that, I thought when we went down there, I thought that's probably a hidden wall there, and sure enough. So again, as with the last one, I do feel save points are a little bit sparse. I mean, when you compare that to Demon and Dark Souls that saves every time. I mean, Eternal Rings, I think, the save points were about right. They were relatively regular, but there was still enough gap between them so there could be some peril. This, I feel, again, the statue at the start, which is quite nice, relatively start, but still feels like a lot of the time you've got to be extra careful because you don't want to die when you've had a long gap of progress and suddenly, oh god, you don't want that case of you get killed and then you lose about 30 minutes progress, which I would do now. So hit slash stab 39 9 29 12 4 9. So I think that's the kind of, I think slash hit, slash has stayed the same. Hit I think's gone up, yeah, but stab has gone down. Okay, I'm going to be brave and go for the shield again. Apparently there's a shield in here, so I'm going to be brave and just go for it. And I'll quickly peg it out of there before it's too late. But very much in the Dark Souls vein with how the equipment is sort of tucked away in booby chest straps. Okay, based on the number of enemies in that little area, I'm not going to... Caution poison was always a giveaway as well. Oh, another save point, so huzzah, we finally got one. Admittedly, it's not actually that far apart, but it's just the pacing of the game makes it seem like it's quite a way apart, because the pacing of this game does need to be much faster. So another of my gripes is that despite the fact I've gone up levels, I do feel I'm still not making much progress with the damage. It still feels like basically this short sword is not much better. So he's still taking 3 hits, they're almost the same. So I think it's 3 or 4 with the blunt club as well. So it doesn't feel like combat-wise we're getting anywhere. And I've not got enough gold to buy a better weapon yet, so I might speed it along. So we're now going to head to the weathered house again. I believe this is the mine, and I believe that this is where we need to go next. Things I always do love about RPGs, the fact you just can aimlessly pick up items from people's houses, and in very few cases does anyone ever say, hey, what are you doing? I think I'm only aware of a couple of games where they made jokes about it, with the fact that you could often lift items from houses. One of them was Shining the Holy Ark, where you nicked a coin from underneath the bed and the character referenced it, and another one is Baldur's Gate. There was a couple of scenes where you went in and started nicking stuff and people would say, what are you doing? It's always a classic. So I think that's actually another shield I picked up, so I didn't need to do the crazy. So it's a timber shield. I'll go with the leather shield. So I didn't need to run into and avoid the skeletons. But as you can see, the skeleton. The only also the skeleton trap was a bit slower that time around. As you remember in the start of the Kingsfield 2, they came up and straight away attacked you. And in fact, if you watch one of the video I did of Kingsfield 2, you'll see me get killed by the skeleton as he comes out of the chest in one of them. Just seeing if you can actually break into this house or not. It looks like you can. Okay, so to emphasise my point about the enemies, as you can see here, we have an enemy that's just a colour palette of the bug again. And so early on, this is really beginning to be a bit frustrating that I'm just fighting what I describe as the same enemy over and over again. Far more so than even in Kingsfield 2, whereas at least we saw quite a bit of variation relatively early on in Kingsfield 2. This. Right, I'm going to need to heal up there, otherwise I'm going to get killed. This, I'm having multiple enemies thrown at me relatively quickly. And they're all the same bug type, so I say I can see why this was not a big seller on the PS2, and it's fair to say this is not a game that I would recommend. And I'm dead. So good thing I did save that statue earlier. Probably I'm actually going to call it quits there. I think overall I've sort of shown the basics of Kingsfield IV. It's not the best game in the series. It's easy to see why. Improvement wise, it's not a huge step forward at all over the previous games. And even as I said, Eternal Rings feels like they did some more interesting ideas. It's a disappointing end to the series, I think, based on the first couple of it, based on the sort of first hour. I really want to say really good positive things about it, but it does just feel like this was not From Software just weren't quite sure where to take the series forward to the PS2, and they sort of struggled. It does feel like it's a game from a bygone era, and it shouldn't have been, because the PS2 should have enabled much more faster. And Eternal Rings does really show how to make a much better game because it's faster paced. I mean, Eternal Rings has got its problems, but Eternal Rings is the better game. In fact, Eternal Rings is probably slightly more closer to Dark Souls, with the fact of the cutscenes, certainly the entrance bosses, and the pacing, as well as I said, the arcade pacing. All in all, this is a novel game in the series, but it's far from Soft's best example. And this is probably one, if you're looking at picking up a Kingsfield game, best left avoided unless you can pick it up cheap. In fact, Eternal Rings can be had, as I mentioned earlier, for pennies online, because it is a really common game. So if you fancy a dabble on PS2, I'd probably prioritise that over this. But if you feel like doing something, if you do feel like going for all the Kingsfield games, then by all means pick this up as well. I mean, this is certainly challenging. It's probably not quite as hard as Kingsfield 2 from what I've played, although the start's a little bit, where am I going, what am I doing again? And Eternal Rings is a little bit more guiding around here. But I think in all seriousness, this is just not the strongest outing of the series as a whole. And when you compare, I mean, this is only 2 games away from Demon Souls. I mean, Demon Souls is such a huge jump forward. It's easy to see, as I said, why Kingsfield 4. I mean, if you look at the review sites, Kingsfield 4 was not a game that was well reviewed, but that is to be expected. I mean, it plays like it's a game. It still plays like an early PS1 game, and by now we're in 2002, and you look at some of the mechanics and the games being released alongside it. I mean, we had Grand Theft Auto 3 by this point, we had Devil May Cry, and this just doesn't cut the mustard. I mean, I'd say Eye of the Beholder and Dungeon Master are definitely better games than this. This is not the strongest outing at all. It's a shame, but developers do make mistakes, and even franchises often have blops in the series. I mean, most good franchises, even the Nintendo ones, if you actually look through their games, they've all had blips, and this is probably the Kingsfield blip. So I'm going to leave it there. This is Random Gamer Riven. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for the rest of our commentary and videos on the origins of Demons and Dark Souls. And if you haven't already, check out the feature we've written about the whole series. Links are below in the description. I'm Random Gamer Riven, and I'm signing off for now.